Hello, I'm here to show you guys this game I started called Waste of Blood. Now this is meant to be like a wasteland type game where you know like survival mechanics, maybe a bit well maybe not so much a sandbox. I'm not entirely sure on that front, but a teensy bit of strategy since you'll be able to go amongst different factions and potentially lead them. So to start off, you get to choose two traits. These aren't really implemented right now, but at least you can like just choose them. Whatever button you choose turns white. Can't choose any more of that, but you can deselect them. Pretty simple, but it should be able to work for most people. So you go to load the actual generation. Currently there's no loading screen because I haven't gone around to making that, since I mainly wanted to focus on this stuff. So this is when you go in the world. Now this is, as you can see, not all of the world. You instead just go around and you have a little bit of a snippet of it. And there's all this generation where right now this is the little city segment, so you have these buildings that are randomly generated, though they're all still gray box-like, and you can head inside, or if you want to you can break through the wall because I did actually add collisions for those, but that's fine. So you can tell you head infinitely in any direction, but that's mainly just because it just scrolls right back around. And hopefully players will notice without getting confused. If need be, I can probably add something that lets you know. In fact, I plan on adding a mini-map at some point, since it's actually something that's not that hard for me to implement, given that when I actually first made this, I had it displaying in the large map version where it has every single tile. I just changed to the small tile version so that whatever I'm showing things are getting updated, it causes far less lag, since it's only going to be changing on these ones. And moreover, if I'm going to change some things that are only going to be seen by the player, I can just be looking at these tiles specifically and what's on them, rather than looking at what's on the entire map. And it makes it easier to make it so I can actually have a proper FPS in this game, since a lot of my other games, the way that frames or whatever are worked is very convoluted, since a lot of functions are just running on their own time of when they're going to go off. Whereas this one does have like an actual like buffer or like main function for all that. So yeah, it's got those little houses, and you do have some grass that's going to be left. I've been told that some of the colors of these are a bit off. I'm going to try and find some way to make them look a bit better, since this one has been told by me to be a little bright, and just generally to me, the ones over here, I want to communicate a bit more that's vegetation, since currently right now they don't so much. That might be possible to do with objects, but if not, I'll just have to change how that one looks completely. You might also want to excuse that the walking cycle for this dude is a bit scuffed, and it also goes through the wall, but I'm sure people won't be able to care so much. Maybe they probably will, but it's fine. So we got this house. Again, there's mainly just three materials for houses. We have wood, we have concrete, as you can see right here, and maybe I can find it, and there's two brick types. Yeah, so here's this one that's just red brick, and oh, okay, that's a glitch. Of course, glitches always happen when I'm recording, but I'm sure that can be fixed eventually. And oh, more red brick. Anyway, so I'm on right now, this black stuff is meant to be ash, and the city actually cannot generate on that, which is my idea mainly just to make it so, so those can be like reserved for the actual like Fallout type objects. Now currently the only real objects that are present in the game right now is just the walls, and the floors are technically objects, although they're classified as their own thing for now, just so I can make things a bit easier to work with. And okay, and finally here's the gray bricks. So houses at least need to be 3 blocks wide or 3 blocks tall. Well, technically not tall, 3 blocks in width. And this is what you can get sometimes. So that's what I have for the most part right now. I've mainly just been working on trying to get this part where you can just see everything in the small view and for scrolling through to work, which and has worked a bit better than I thought it would. This house is not helping my point given that it's kind of broken, but we can just forget that, because I'm going to see some. Oh, yeah, that's glitched. Again, I'll need to make sure I can tell why that is happening, but I'm sure that can be done. So you might be seeing how that's getting deleted or whatever, and something that's happening essentially is that as you scroll through, basically whatever, like as soon as you cross over to like another tile, basically, technically all the tiles around you are actually changing to what they look like. It's just it's being done in such a way to make it so it's a smooth transition. So basically, if you have it has like tiles all around in a larger square, as you go, tiles get pushed this way to your right, and once they get far enough, essentially they get reverted, so that you don't really have any that are going to be going past, since there's actually just a giant little frame that's all around this that I made, and it only goes out so far, but at least it's enough that you can get this little thing to work without it being noticeable. So yeah. And this mostly works for the most part, and I was able to get the scrolling to work correctly to the point where, well, besides that part, to the point where you can't really see any jumps besides those weird glitches, which seem to be an issue due to how it's not able to tell when you're shifting to a different block correctly, which could just be something that's in the collisions for the block, for the tiles, or it could be something else entirely, which I'm hoping not, since I don't want to revise this script all over again. Which, speaking of which, I will show you now. So, this is the code for the game. I'll go all the way to the beginning so I can show you some stuff. So this uses some of my procedural generator I've made. So I have these two values, like all this right here with the comments, these are all from my procedural generator. So it basically just gets decides how many horizontal tiles you have, how many vertical you'll have. You can actually edit this as well in the game, in the settings, or at least that is an option. I might have deleted that for now. I can check real quick. Okay, oh, yeah. So currently it's not in the game. Mainly the settings is just removing stuff, which will not actually let you do what you want to do. So all of this is basically just adding in the stuff for on the main menu, which I have it where it's actually just adding it in so that whenever I need the shift between game settings or main menu or whatever, I can just do it using the stuff that already makes it in the first place rather than having to make a whole new function for it. And something also important is right here, this is what gets it to actually try and fit whatever computer monitor size you have. Now, it sometimes is not the best, however this is the best I've been able to do to make sure it works. And if you're wondering, these values like the 800 and the 1442 have been chosen based on how that's the size for when I'm viewing this in my laptop. So I can roughly try and have it so it'll scale based on mine to yours, which can of course have its own problems, but that's the closest I can try and do. Though I'm happy to try other methods if anyone knows of them. So this is where I have all the trait stuff, and this is the code for all actually getting the buttons and everything to work correctly. Not too much really. So then we get to the actual world generation, where it'll basically first generate all of them in a random way, where it mainly just goes between a few different types of blocks, tiles. And this part right here, if you're wondering why it mentions water when there's no water, this is from how the procedural generator was meant to make islands, which, as you can tell in the game, is no longer its purpose at all. So this also right here is used to determine how many times this function, the checker, which this is what runs after you actually get the base things how they are. And when it goes here, all of this is just trying to get all the tiles around each block that you're going to be looking at, and it determines what type is. Those are going to be used to determine what types are around it, and it increases this value, which is basically just used each time to determine how much of a certain type is around. And once that's done, it uses that to see whether it should change to become different types. using the functions like this, where I can't remember off the top of my head which type refers to which, since I currently haven't looked at these specific numbers in like a week or two since I've been working on other stuff. So the rest of that has those similar things like that until we get down to here. Now this currently is actually not a function that's used in the game, as this is the original tile placer that lets you see everything in like just one giant grid. And it could work. In fact, I could show you now, which I will. So I'll go into console and we can see how well it works. It will have issues because there are some parts of it that no longer work. In fact, it may not work at all, possibly because there's going to be this thing that's going to be blocking it. So back to the code we go. But essentially just puts it all in a giant grid, and I'll use that to base how a mini-map will be made, but it'll just simply shrink everything down. And then we get to the fun part, which is the city generator, where it'll choose a few random tiles to be the starts of cities, and then from there it goes to this function where it's essentially the checker again, but this time it's only meant for the cities, and any tiles that are next to cities will be very likely to become cities. However, it's not going to go based off like if they're diagonally close. That's mainly just to stop cities from like spreading all over the map, and to make it a bit more predictable how they will form. And like after that, it will go to this function, and this is instead going to be, if I recall correctly, this is to place all the objects in the city, which will basically just be the floors and then the actual building parts. So a lot of this is rather complicated in what I did and very convoluted. Probably a good bit of spaghetti code, but overall it does work, and we get stuff like this where currently it's all hand-coded how the objects are placed like that, since I had hoped to make it so it could be a bit more automatic. However, that was in vain. However, either way, this is the closest I could get, and it still roughly works. And essentially, it's looking to see like on what part of the floors it is on. So like for example, right here, it's like on the left corner. Therefore, I put one block in the top left of that, one wall block in the top left of that tile, one in the top right, and then one in the bottom left. And it does stuff like that for the rest of them. However, you may also notice there's this OR, which is because if there's one of these that's selected to be a side door, then that'll mean that it'll choose like whichever one is the middle block, that will actually be excluded, so that you can actually have your door to enter the building and not be trapped forever, which would probably not be pleasant. So then we get here, and this part is where you first have the player, like it's going to be selecting where the player can spawn, or at least rather what tile. And after that, it goes to view buffer 1, which is actually not really a buffer at all. It's rather just getting everything set up for the proper buffer, or the render, or whatever you want to call it, really. I probably used the wrong words, but it will essentially have it start going. And first, it will make the frame for everything to be around, and then it starts making all the tiles, where it will have to go through. First, this is actually for the tiles that are being placed down, the new ones that you see, not the ones that have already been made. And then this, yeah, all of this is essentially getting it, trying to determine which of the actual real tiles it's pulling from. So it changes based on whether it's before the middle tile, if it is the middle tile, which is the easiest one to do, and after the middle tile. So I may need to check these. I recently had to change a 5 here to a 4 because I was unaware that my code had made it so, technically speaking, the stuff on the middle would actually not have the same amount of V tiles technically, since it would not have actually passed enough for that. and I might need to check if that's the same case for the H tiles. So once it does all that, it's pretty easy from there, since then it's just creating those tiles based off the first thing where it got the like X and Y coordinates it'll need, and then the source will be equal to like what the real tile is at that location compared to the player, which is a bit long and includes a lot of window variable things. I don't exactly know what those are really called. I learned about them once and I've used them ever since, and they've been very useful. And you get here, you also have to take the floor and objects of each one. And then you see if there's a floor, you just create a floor on top, not that hard for that one. But then you have objects where you need another for loop, where you go and you have to upscale all the objects, because everything on that part is actually four times as large as it would normally. I could maybe change that, but I've done that just because it was easier to make it so it's visible. And that gets all the objects. And then you get here where you're getting the X and Y values for the character done. Since, well, technically speaking, that was equal to that one tile at first. It changes it to be where it's that tile, however it's also plus 20 so that you appear in the middle for the X. And then this right here is getting it so you can actually have movement. And then lastly you get to the proper view buffer render, or however you want to call it, where it first is going to be checking to see whether the tile it is now is equal to or not of the last one the player was on. And then it's gonna, if it's different, then it's basically gonna get rid of all of the floor and all of the objects that were there. And then it's also gonna check and see like what's the player X and Y distance from that tile that's on in terms of like the real values. And that's important because if you want to get the scroll effect, you have to be able to move those tiles in accordance based on how far away the player is from those tiles, essentially, rather than just simply changing how they look. And if we carry on, you have some code that's basically lifted from the other one. In fact, there's probably some issues that are causing the glitches you saw based on that. So we continued through. And if you're wondering, these X and Y things have to be redone, mainly because, as I mentioned, they have to be changed like that. So then you get here where it's basically rechecking to see like which of the real tiles those line up with again. And something you'll also notice is that instead of actually creating new objects, it's just changing those tiles to be different sources and styles, with the style just being so it changes the positions. And then you get the floor and objects done, where you do have to create new objects because I delete those to make it easier so I don't need to move everything around and cause a pain. And then lastly you get to this bit, which was one of the last things I added, where this is essentially to check to see whether it needs to do the animation for running, where essentially like every 10 times it goes through this, it checks to see whether there's been movement at all by the player in those last 10 times, since it is at 60 FPS, or at least that's what I tried to roughly do it as, since it's updating every 16 milliseconds, which should roughly equate to 60 FPS, or I could have done my math wrong. But with that, you will have it where like every 10 of those, if it has moved, then it'll increase the run phase that's in, and the player will be seen like running a bit more, as you saw. And lastly, you have the up, down, left, and right functions, which are basically the same type of thing, where if you're wondering, it's only actually changing by 1 each time. However, if you saw in the gameplay, it may have looked like it was more, and that is of course because since everything was scaled up by 4, your movement also scaled up by 4. So while you're technically only moving like 1 pixel in terms of on the real map, you're actually moving 4 when you look at it. And here are also the functions there for determining where the player is, which I'm hoping are working. And one thing of note is also that when you're going up or down, the Y value that's checking for changes in order to make it so that it will not be changing your tile too abruptly whenever you're going in one of those directions. A similar thing might need to be done in terms of the X's for the left and right. And then lastly, we get these few functions which are not really very important. And something I will mention is that this is one I found online at some point that I've been using for a while. And it's just a very basic thing, but it helps a lot to use. So, as for plans for next time, I will hopefully be able to do the following, which will be fixing all those glitches that you saw in terms of movement, and at least start on object creation for the different tiles. And as one thing that's more in the future, I will potentially be able to start on the NPCs of the game, which, if you're wondering, will likely include other humans, which will not necessarily be evil, but at least you might be able to ally with them and should be inhabitants of cities, and potentially some animals slash like basic enemies, like, I don't want to say ghouls or zombies, but maybe something along those lines, like more mutants. So yeah, I'll try to get that done for next time, which may be in a week or so, or may even be longer. I'm not entirely sure, since I don't have much of a plan for how if I'm going to be updating this. However, with my university classes done for now, I should be able to do so. Well, see you next time.